Prologue: the horse was called Sovereign, and he had destroyed 11 riders in 2 years. Not killed. Destroyed in the specific humiliating way that a 17-hand stallion with a genius-level survival instinct and a profound distrust of humans could destroy a person's confidence, and occasionally, their collarbone. He had thrown the king's master of horse into a water trough. He had bitten the chief equerry so precisely that the man still flinched near the stables 8 months later. He had learned to unlock his own stall, had developed an apparent understanding of human scheduling that allowed him to escape at maximum inconvenience intervals, and had once been found standing calmly in the council chamber at dawn, having navigated 3 corridors and 2 locked doors through methods that no one could explain, and that the stable staff attributed to demonic intelligence. Alpha King Alaric Stormvane had purchased Sovereign 18 months ago from a breeder who described him as spirited, which was the equine equivalent of calling a hurricane breezy. Alaric was an excellent horseman, arguably the finest in the Stormvane territories, and he had approached Sovereign with the confidence of a man who had never met a horse he could not ride. That confidence had lasted approximately 9 seconds, which was how long it took Sovereign to calculate the precise combination of movements required to deposit the Alpha King in the mud of the training yard, while 40 members of the court watched from the gallery. Alaric had attempted to ride Sovereign 14 more times. Sovereign had won 14 more times. The horse was undefeated. The king was developing a complex. The wall was the final insult. The great stone wall at the eastern edge of the palace grounds. 8 feet of granite that had been a jumping challenge for Stormvane riders for generations. Every king since Alaric's great-grandfather had cleared it as a rite of passage. Alaric had cleared it on 3 different horses. But clearing it on Sovereign, the horse that everyone said could jump it, whose bloodline was bred for exactly this kind of obstacle, whose raw physical ability exceeded any animal in the royal stables, had become an obsession. Not because the wall mattered, because Sovereign's refusal to cooperate represented the one thing Alaric could not command through authority: genuine partnership. He could order soldiers, he could direct policy, he could govern a territory through the force of his will, but he could not will a horse over a wall, and the limitation was eating him alive. I arrived at the Stormvane Palace on a Tuesday in October, leading a mare with a foaling complication that the local veterinarian could not resolve. My name is Isolde Brennan, and I was a horse breeder and trainer from the Brennan farm in the Callaway Valley. 33 years old, unmarried, unremarkable by any metric except one. I understood horses. Not in the mystical, horse whisperer way that storytellers romanticized. In the practical, physical, earned through 15 years of daily workway that came from growing up on a breeding farm, where horses were not pets or symbols, but partners in a shared enterprise of survival. I understood their language, their logic, the specific biomechanics of trust and fear that governed every interaction between a horse and a human. I had trained horses that other trainers had given up on, not through dominance, through communication. Through the patient, repetitive, unglamorous process of showing an animal that the human in front of it was safe, consistent, and worth trusting. I was not at the palace for Sovereign. I was there for the mare. But the mare's stall was adjacent to Sovereign's, and when I walked past his door, the stallion did something that the stable staff said he had never done for any visitor. He came to the front of his stall, put his head over the door, and stood still. Not the tense, coiled stillness of a horse preparing to bite, the quiet, attentive stillness of an animal assessing something new, and deciding, provisionally, not to reject it. I stopped walking, looked at him. He looked at me. And in the way that sometimes happens between a person who speaks horse and a horse who has been waiting for someone to speak it, a connection formed. Not magic. Recognition. The mutual identification of 2 creatures who operated on similar frequencies. The king's worst horse and the farm girl from the valley. It was not love at first sight. It was language at first sight. And language between species that cannot speak is worth more than love. 11 riders destroyed. 15 failed attempts by a king. A stallion that unlocked his own stall and once invaded the council chamber. Then a horse trainer walked past his door and the worst horse in the kingdom did something he had never done. Stood still. Because some connections are not about dominance, they are about being understood. Chapter 1. I spent 3 days at the palace treating the mare, and in those 3 days I visited Sovereign's stall 11 times. Not to train him. I had not been asked, and I did not insert myself into situations without invitation. But the stall was beside the mare's, and each time I passed, Sovereign came to his door. By the 2nd day, he was allowing me to touch his muzzle. By the 3rd, he was leaning into my hand with the particular pressure that horses use to indicate comfort. A gentle, deliberate lean that says you may stay. The stable master, a weathered beta named Greer Callahan, who had managed the Stormvane horses for 28 years, watched these interactions with an expression that evolved from skepticism to fascination to something approaching reverence. "He has never done that," Greer said on the third morning, watching Sovereign rest his chin on my shoulder while I scratched behind his ear. "Not for the king, not for the master of horse, not for anyone. He bites anyone who enters the stall. He bit the farrier last month. 3 stitches. He is not aggressive," I said. "He is defensive. There is a difference. Aggressive horses attack. Defensive horses react. Every behavior you have described, the throwing, the biting, the escaping, those are not dominance behaviors. Those are the responses of a horse that has been handled with force and has learned that humans are threats to be managed rather than partners to be trusted." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Before the king purchased him?" Greer was quiet. "Then, the breeder trained through submission. Ropes, crops, isolation. Standard methods for high-spirited animals. Standard and wrong," I said. "You do not train intelligence through punishment. You train it through respect. This horse is not spirited. He is brilliant. And brilliant animals who are treated with force become exactly what Sovereign is, strategically uncooperative. He has not been misbehaving. He has been surviving, and every rider who tried to dominate him confirmed his belief that humans are unsafe." Greer looked at Sovereign, who was resting peacefully against my shoulder. "Can you ride him?" he asked. "I do not know yet," I said, "but I can ask." The king found out about my visits on the third day. Not through official channels, through the palace gossip network, which was faster than any formal communication system and significantly more reliable. Alaric Stormvane appeared at the stables at 4 in the afternoon, still in his council attire, looking like a man who had left an important meeting to confirm a rumor he could not believe. He was tall, sharp-featured, with the particular bearing of a man who had been told he was exceptional since birth, and had mostly lived up to it. His eyes, gray, intense, accustomed to commanding, found me standing outside Sovereign's stall, brushing the stallion's neck, while Sovereign stood calmly, which was approximately as likely as finding a cat doing arithmetic. "You are the horse trainer," he said. "I am the horse breeder," I corrected. "The training is a secondary skill. And you have been handling my horse. Visiting your horse," I corrected again. "Handling implies work. I have been standing near him, and he has been choosing not to kill me. These are different activities." He stared at me with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being corrected and was not certain whether he found it offensive or interesting. "I have been trying to ride that horse for 18 months, he said. "I have the best trainers in the territory, military equestrians, Olympic-level riders. He has defeated all of them. And you, a breeder from the valley, walk past his stall and he rests his head on your shoulder." "How?" I asked him nicely, I said. He blinked. "You asked him." I communicated through body language, scent, and spatial awareness that I was not a threat. Horses do not understand words. They understand intention. Every person who has entered this stall in 18 months has entered with the intention of controlling him. I entered with the intention of meeting him. He can tell the difference. So can most animals. Humans are the only species that confuses dominance with communication. The king arrived expecting a trick, found a woman correcting his vocabulary and a stallion resting his chin on her shoulder. "I asked him nicely," she said. He did not know whether to be offended or fascinated. He settled on both. Chapter 2. The challenge was issued the next morning. Alaric appeared at the stables with his riding gear and the particular energy of a man who had spent the night forming a plan he considered brilliant. He was flanked by Greer, Commander Sable Okafor, his head of security who attended most things because she did not trust anyone, and Lord Jasper Hale, the master of horse, who still flinched near Sovereign's stall and was clearly hoping to witness someone else suffer for a change. "Miss Brennan," Alaric said with formal precision, "I would like to propose a challenge. I was mucking out the mare's stall. Your Majesty, I have manure on my boots and a foaling complication to manage. I am not in a challenging mood." Nevertheless, he smiled, a competitive, sharp smile that I would later learn meant he was enjoying himself and was about to make someone's life significantly more interesting. "Ride Sovereign. In the training yard. In front of the court. If you can stay mounted for one full circuit of the yard, something no rider has accomplished in 18 months, I will pay you 10 times your normal training fee and give you first pick from the next royal foal crop. And if I cannot, then you admit that the horse is unrideable, and I stop losing sleep over a 17-hand tyrant who has personally embarrassed me 15 times. I leaned on my shovel. "There is a third option," I said. "What?" "I ride Sovereign for one full circuit, then I jump the eastern wall." The yard went silent. Greer made a sound like he had been punched. Lord Hale went pale. Even Commander Okafor, who was professionally unflappable, raised an eyebrow. The eastern wall, 8 feet of granite, the Stormbane rite of passage, had not been attempted on Sovereign because no one could stay on Sovereign long enough to reach the wall, let alone jump it. The wall was Alaric's obsession, the challenge he had been unable to complete on the one horse capable of completing it, and I was offering to do it on my first ride. Alaric studied me with the reassessing gaze of a man recalculating his opinion. "You are very confident for a woman who has never sat on this horse." "I am very informed," I corrected. "I have spent 3 days reading him. He is physically capable of clearing that wall by a significant margin. His conformation is exceptional, his hindquarter power is massive, and his bloodline was bred for exactly this obstacle. The reason he has not jumped it is not ability. It is trust. He does not trust any rider enough to commit to an 8-foot obstacle at speed. If I can establish enough trust in one session to convince him I will not interfere with his jump, that I will give him his head and let his body do what it was built to do, he will clear it. Easily. If you are wrong, if I am wrong, I will land in the dirt the same way you did 15 times, and we will have that in common." He laughed, a real, surprised laugh that transformed his face from commanding to human. "Deal," he said. "Tomorrow morning, full court audience. I hope your confidence is justified, Miss Brennan." "My confidence is not the relevant variable," I said. "His trust is, and trust is not about confidence, it is about consistency. I will spend tonight in the stable, not riding, talking, and tomorrow we will see whether he believes me." The king shook his head. "You are going to spend the night talking to a horse. I am going to spend the night letting a horse decide whether I am worth listening to," I corrected. "There is a difference." She raised the stakes herself, not just ride, but jump the wall he had never cleared. Then she told the king she would spend the night talking to the horse. Not training. Talking. Because trust is not built through dominance. It is built through showing up and letting someone decide you are safe. Chapter 3. I spent the night in Sovereign's stall. Not dramatically. I brought a blanket, a flask of tea, and the book I was reading, and I sat in the corner while the stallion processed my presence. For the first hour, he stood at the opposite wall, watching me with the vigilant assessment of an animal deciding whether to trust. For the second hour, he moved to the center of the stall, still watching. By the third hour, he had lowered his head, the equine equivalent of dropping a guard, and was breathing the slow, deep rhythm of a horse who had decided the human in his space was not a threat. At midnight, he lay down. Horses only lie down in the presence of someone they trust profoundly, because lying down makes them vulnerable, and vulnerability, for a prey animal, is the ultimate act of faith. Sovereign lay in the straw 3 feet from me, and I set down my book and cried. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming privilege of being trusted by a creature that had been given every reason not to trust. Every trainer who had forced him, every rider who had dominated him, every human who had treated his intelligence as defiance rather than communication, he had survived all of it, and was still capable of lying down beside a stranger because she had asked nicely and meant it. The resilience of that was staggering. In the morning, with the entire court assembled in the gallery, and Alaric standing at the rail with the controlled tension of a man watching either his obsession being fulfilled or his reputation being destroyed, I entered the training yard with Sovereign. I had saddled him in the stall, slowly narrating each step, letting him see and smell every piece of equipment before it touched him. He accepted the tack without resistance, not because I had broken his resistance, because I had not activated it. There was no force to resist against, just a woman putting a saddle on a horse and explaining what she was doing, as if his understanding mattered, because it did. I mounted from a block rather than the ground because Sovereign was tall and I was not, and because launching yourself onto a nervous horse from below is the equine equivalent of a jump scare, and I was not about to undermine 6 hours of trust building with a clumsy mount. I settled into the saddle. Sovereign stood still. 200 people in the gallery held their breath. Alaric's hands tightened on the rail, and I squeezed my legs gently, the lightest possible cue, a suggestion rather than a command, and Sovereign walked forward. The circuit of the yard took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of the worst horse in the kingdom walking, trotting, then cantering with a woman on his back who was not fighting him, not gripping, not communicating fear or dominance through her body. I rode the way my mother taught me before she died, with my hips following the horse's motion, my hands light on the reins, my weight balanced over his center of gravity so that carrying me required no adjustment, no compensation, no effort. I was not riding him. I was traveling with him. The difference was everything. The gallery was silent, not the tense silence of anticipation, the hushed silence of people watching something they recognized as extraordinary without being able to articulate why. Because what was extraordinary was not the writing, it was the partnership. Two beings moving in complete synchronization, communicating through pressure and release, and the invisible language of bodies that trust each other. Then I turned, sovereign, toward the wall, the 8-foot granite barrier at the eastern edge, the obstacle that 15 riders had failed to reach and one king had dreamed of clearing. I felt Sovereign see it. The slight lift of his head, the gathering of his hindquarters, the instinctive assessment that horses perform in milliseconds. Can I clear this? He could. I knew he could. He knew he could. The only question was whether he trusted me enough to commit. I leaned forward, gave him his head, released the reins to let him judge the distance himself, trusting his body the way I was asking him to trust mine. And I whispered, because horses feel vibration even if they do not understand words, "I've got you." Sovereign launched. The power of a 17-hand stallion at full gallop committing to an 8-foot jump is a force of nature, a vertical explosion of muscle and momentum that defies the physics of an animal that large becoming airborne. He cleared the wall by 18 inches. Not scraping, not struggling, soaring, with the effortless grace of a horse finally doing the thing he was built to do, freed from the weight of 18 months of humans who tried to force him over instead of asking him to fly. We landed on the other side and he cantered 3 strides and stopped, calm, collected, breathing hard but not stressed. I sat on his back on the other side of the wall that the Alpha King had never cleared, and I pressed my face into his mane and said, "Good boy." That is all. Good boy. 200 people erupted. She spent the night in his stall. He lay down beside her, the ultimate act of trust from a prey animal. In the morning, she rode the horse no one could ride, jumped the wall no one could clear, and landed on the other side with 2 words. Good boy. 200 people erupted. The king had not moved from the rail. Chapter 4. Alaric was waiting when I rode Sovereign back through the gate. The court was still buzzing, the gallery alive with the particular energy of people who had witnessed something they would retell for years. But Alaric was quiet. He stood at the gate with his hands at his sides and an expression I could not read, not the competitive disappointment of a man who had been outdone, not the calculating assessment of a king evaluating a useful asset. Something more personal. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like the expression of a man who had just had his entire understanding of something fundamental rearranged. I dismounted and led Sovereign to where Alaric stood. The stallion, the horse that had bitten, thrown, and humiliated every human who approached him, walked beside me on a loose lead and stopped when I stopped, standing calmly beside the king he had defeated 15 times. Alaric looked at the horse, then at me, then back at the horse. "You cleared the wall," he said. "He cleared the wall," I corrected. "I was a passenger. He chose to jump. I chose to let him. That is partnership, not riding." He was quiet. Then, "I have spent 18 months trying to force that horse to do what you accomplished in one night by sitting in his stall and reading a book. What does that tell you?" "That force does not work," I said. "On horses or on people. Sovereign is not your enemy. He is a brilliant animal who is taught by humans that cooperation means submission. You cannot command trust. You can only offer consistency and wait for it to be returned." He studied me with those gray eyes, and I saw the recalculation happening. Not about the horse, but about me. About the assumptions he had made when a valley breeder walked into his stables and corrected his vocabulary and spent the night talking to a stallion. "Stay," he said, not as a command, as a request, the first I had heard from him that sounded genuinely uncertain, not for the horse. He stopped, reconsidered, restarted. "I would like you to stay, at the palace, as Royal Equestrian Advisor, or as whatever title justifies keeping you here so I can learn how you do what you do, how you communicate without force, how you build trust with a creature that has every reason not to give it." He paused. "I am not just talking about horses." "I know," I said. He met my eyes. The competitive energy he had brought to the stables that morning was gone. In its place was something more vulnerable, the expression of a man who was very good at commanding and very bad at asking, who had just watched a woman accomplish through patience what his power could not touch, and who was beginning to understand that the lesson was not about horses at all. She corrected him one last time. He cleared the wall. I was a passenger. The king who had spent 18 months forcing saw a woman succeed through asking. And the lesson was not about horses. He knew it. She knew it. The horse probably knew it too. Chapter 5. I stayed. Not because a king asked, because the work was worth doing. Sovereign needed continued rehabilitation, and the royal stables housed 14 other horses with behavioral issues rooted in the same force-based training methods that had damaged him. I restructured the stable program from the ground up, replacing dominance-based techniques with communication-based ones, retraining the stable staff in equine body language, establishing protocols that prioritized partnership over submission. Greer Callahan, the stable master, became my fiercest ally after watching Sovereign transform from the palace terror to the horse who followed me around the yard like a very large dog, and once fell asleep standing up while I braided his mane. Alaric and I circled each other for 3 months with the cautious assessment of two creatures who were interested but not yet willing to commit. He visited the stables daily, not to ride initially, but to watch me work, to study the methods that had succeeded where his force had failed. He asked questions with the genuine curiosity of a man unlearning a lifetime of assumptions about power and control. Why do you let him choose? Because choice produces cooperation. Compliance produces obedience. Cooperation lasts. Obedience lasts until the moment the force is removed. He applied these observations to his governance. I watched it happen in real time, the king who had ruled through authority beginning to experiment with consultation, with patience, with the revolutionary concept of asking rather than telling. His council was bewildered, his territory thrived. He kissed me in the stable on a Thursday. Not a strategic kiss. A clumsy, honest, slightly panicked kiss from a man who had been circling for 3 months, and had run out of patience. We were discussing hoof care, which is not typically a romantic subject. But his hand was on the stable door, and my hand was on the same stable door, and the proximity combined with 3 months of intellectual attraction produced a kiss that tasted like hay and honest intention. Then, Sovereign nudged him in the back so hard he stumbled into me, which either meant the horse approved, or the horse was asserting territorial dominance over his favorite human. I chose to interpret it as approval. He proposed 6 months later, in the field beyond the eastern wall. We were riding together, him on his usual horse, me on Sovereign, who had become so calm under my care that visiting diplomats frequently mistook him for a different animal. We had just cleared the wall side by side, Alaric on his horse, me on Sovereign, and the joy of it, the shared flight, the wind and the height and the landing together on the other side, made him pull up beside me and say, "Marry me, Isolde. Not because you can ride my horse, because you can teach me to be better at everything I thought I already knew. Because you correct me without fearing me, and you sleep in stalls, and you made the worst horse in my kingdom trust again. And because watching you clear that wall was the moment I understood that the most powerful thing in the world is not authority, it is the willingness to ask nicely and mean it." I looked at him from Sovereign's back. The horse beneath me was breathing easily, relaxed, happy. A different creature from the defensive, strategic, dangerous animal the palace had known. Transformed not through force, but through the patient, daily, unglamorous work of showing up and being trustworthy. "Yes," I said, "but I have a condition," he smiled. "Of course you do. We keep the stables the way I have built them. No return to force-based methods. Partnership stays. For the horses and for us. Partnership stays," he agreed. "For everything." Epilogue. 3 years later, our daughter was born in the cottage I maintained, near the stables because I refused to give birth anywhere that did not smell like hay and horses. And because Sovereign's stall was 12 steps from my door and the sound of him breathing was the most soothing thing I knew, we named her Greer after the stable master who had become family, and who cried when he heard and pretended it was allergies and fooled absolutely no one. Greer Jr. had her father's gray eyes and my hands, strong, capable, already reaching for everything within grasp, and a temperament that the midwife described as determined, which was a professional euphemism for stubborn beyond reason. Sovereign lived to 22, which was old for a stallion of his size, and spent his final years as the gentlest horse in the royal stables. Children rode him. Visiting dignitaries rode him. He stood patiently while small humans braided his mane with wildflowers and gave him entirely too many apples. The horse that had destroyed 11 riders became the horse that taught 100 children to love riding, because trust, once established, does not reverse. It deepens. It becomes the foundation on which everything else is built. When he died, on a spring morning in the field beyond the eastern wall, Alaric and I were with him. The king who had once tried to force a horse over a wall sat in the grass beside the animal that had taught him more about leadership than any advisor, any war, any political crisis. And he wept. Not for the horse. For everything the horse had represented, the lesson that power is not control, that authority is not dominance, and that the strongest bond in the world is the one an animal gives you when it decides, freely and without coercion, that you are worth trusting. The wall still stands at the eastern edge of the palace grounds, 8 feet of granite. Our daughter cleared it for the first time at 14. On a mare, she had trained herself using the methods I taught her. Communication, the radical act of asking rather than telling. She cleared it by 2 feet, laughing, with the fearless joy of a girl who had grown up in stables and knew that the secret to jumping impossible walls was not courage or strength or royal blood. It was partnership. And partnership, her mother had taught her, begins when you walk into a stall, sit down in the straw, and let someone decide you are worth trusting. The Alpha King challenged her to ride his worst horse. She jumped the wall he had never once cleared, not through force, through trust. She taught a horse to fly and a king to ask. Their daughter cleared the wall at 14, laughing. On a horse she trained herself, because the secret was never courage, it was partnership. And partnership begins when you sit in the straw and let someone decide you are safe.